Are you gonna project that? Yeah, I was gonna say more.
You definitely could. I can make you a co-host and we can provide your screen share.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. Yeah. Usually works. Today it's just technology is just.
Good try today.
Yeah, it's the it's trail. I don't know. I've got a lot of water. Does anybody else need water?
Actually, oh, that's, I was gonna bring a couple, yeah, water.
I have
Do you have water?
Are you joining? You're joining the meeting now?
Yeah, at the moment, it's not letting me log in, but it will work.
Okay.
I promise. There we go.
Looking for you.
This earlier today. Oh. Yeah, but that's right. You were doing enough, so, you know, you didn't have to come to that too, but it was nice.
Hey, I don't.
And it's not letting, it's not letting me log in because it's through my school email.
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
okay.
Oh,
Oh, here you are. Well, no, that's Kimberly. I'm letting Kimberly in. I don't see you in the waiting room.
You have the meeting ID,
We were talking.
Yes.
or is there somewhere I can pull up?
Yeah, I can give it to you right now. It is. Where's the meeting? Where's the meeting?
CIN.
I have it on my calendar, but I don't. I wonder if I can see the meeting ID here. Meeting info, yeah. Okay, the meeting ID is 815
815
09
09
96
96
69
69
87.
Motion.
What's that?
All right, and I could be,
Trans people.
The passcode is NAACP,
full capitals or lower?
lowercase.
So we should serve to wait for you to take out their sections. Reproduce the occasion.
Did let you join?
So what's?
I did have
the.
Sorry, you're on the right.
Oh, yeah.
It's
It's a registration, right?
They should have a greater.
And
Yes.
it could be in the moment.
Okay, cool.
Took my shoes too. Kind of was making these people.
So then I'm going to reintroduce since we're recording.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for your patience. I would love to welcome everyone tonight. I wanted to welcome SSU history professor, Dr. Amy Kittlestrom, PhD, and research fellows, Mikey Carrillo and Cole Rupert, as they share an update on the Sonoma County Slavery Historical Project, research project, which is now coming into its third year. So this is a very exciting partnership that NAACP is honored to have with Sonoma State University and with Dr. Kittlestrom and this team. So thank you so much for joining us, and you should be able to share your screen at this point.
Let me just say a little something to introduce our fellows here, because they're doing this presentation. They devised it. They're the ones. But I just you know, I'm thankful to be here. I'm so thankful that we're doing this project, you know. And I'm thankful for our fellows. Cole has just finished his second year with this project. He has really devoted a lot of time and energy and initiative to this project. I haven't always been able to be there I often haven't been able to be there, he's figured a lot of things out. He's really added to our knowledge. And Mikey's been with us since last summer, then plus this whole academic year. And I've also been privileged to witness Mikey's growth as a researcher and professionalizing through this work. And I'll let them talk, and then in the Q&A or whatever, I'm happy to contribute things. I may have to do some fine tuning or something like that, but let's go.
Thank you so much. I just want to make sure that you're muted.
Yes, I'm.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm muted.
Okay.
Yeah, it should be good now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any info? No?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, great.
Okay.
I
Thank
was
you so
able to
much.
figure out.
Yeah,
that.
thank you.
Okay.
Just a few extra technical issues, just the real.
Just make sure.
Yeah,
It's really not this bad.
we just enjoy it so much. Alrighty, well, yes, thank you everyone for the wonderful introductions. I'm Cole Rubert.
I'm Mikey.
And as we said, this is our sort of our presentation on the history of slavery here in Sonoma County. So first off, really, I just want to say before we get into that, of course, I wanted to give thank you to of course, Dr. Kittlestrom to be sure this year. Of course, without them, this project would not have happened. The leaders, the sort of people who have been pushing this forward. But I also just wanted to say thank you to Jason, Alicia, and Yumiko, people who had worked on this project previously. So of course, me and Mike are not the only ones who have been working on this, and others as well. As well as of course Hillary Smith and everyone at the Sonoma History and Genealogy Library over in Santa Rosa. They've been instrumental in sort of helping us find all the different information we've been working with, giving us a space to conduct our research in, and just be able to put this together. So really would not have been able to do this without any of their assistance. So yeah, just some of the findings we have found. So one of the big things that we sort of come across is what were called the California State Conventions of Colored Citizens. So there were 4 of these in 1855, 56, 57, and a little bit later in 1865, just after the Civil War. What they were focused on, also, I just realized that little bit there is. There you go. That makes it look nicer in a moment, ideally. There we go.
All right.
Yeah. But yeah, so there were 4 of these conventions. They were focused on sort of political and social actions that could be taken by the African American community here in the state of California to improve the sort of rights and situation of Blacks in the state. So some of the major issues that they were working with was one of the biggest ones really was the right to give testimony. So in the state at the time, and really across the country, but specifically here in California, really non-whites could not testify if there was any sort of legal issue involving a white and a non-white. Anyone who was not white was allowed to testify. Now, obviously, the let's say the political problems that could come from this were really obvious. You cannot defend yourself if somebody accuses you, and you and any of your friends, family, or other witnesses who were in your community are automatically not allowed to give testimony. So this gave this was a huge legal restriction for them. Also, of course, with the right to vote was also a major one. Obviously, America prides itself on being a democracy, but if you are not allowed to participate in that democracy, that is, you're not able to defend your right to give the right to give testimony. That would not happen if you're able to represent yourself as well as other things. But it was not just legal issues that they were also involved with. They also participated in a lot of sort of civic funding, so things like newspapers, schools, as well as prohibition, which was a very common issue at the time. All of these different initiatives that they also voted to sort of give funding to across the state. And then of course they also reported on the state of African Americans throughout the state. We have a little sort of cutout there of specifically the report from Sonoma County, in which it says, I quote, Sonoma County reported 72 residents, that is Black residents, 27 of whom are farmers, and it was reported as a startling fact that 26 of those engaged as farmers were claimed as slaves by their employers, who brought them from the South. The assessed value of property is $4,700. So obviously, at this point, California is ostensibly a free state. When we joined the Union, we explicitly disbarred slavery in our Constitution. Yet here in this report, there's 26 people explicitly being claimed as slaves. So, often, as you'll see throughout this, often they're sort of trying to hide and sort of obfuscate the status of people. However, here, there are people who are acting brazenly out and doing this. And so, here in Sonoma County, it's, something that is going on.
Which year was that again?
This was, I believe this was 56.
56.
Yeah, so it wasn't the first one, but it was the next one. However, as I mentioned, one of some of the civic activities, that they were doing was defunding of newspapers. So from 1856 to about 1898, there were 3 different Black newspapers that were based, all of them were based out of San Francisco. The first one was the Mirror of Times, which was a little sketchy on finding exactly when it was established, but around 1856, give or take. And it lasted until 1862, where it was then eventually fell out of funding, but was immediately replaced with the Pacific Appeal. And a few years after the founding of the Pacific Appeal, there was a split between the sort of the leadership, and another counter newspaper, The Elevator, was founded. And these two went on simultaneously, with the Appeal going until 1880 and The Elevator going until 1898. Here in Sonoma County, we actually had a large number of representatives for these newspapers. So there was George Miller, who distributed newspapers for the Mirror and the Appeal, John Richards, who distributed for the Appeal and the Elevator, and Francis Miller, who distributed for the Appeal. So as you can see, they went through they were all representatives for different ones. However, they all had at least at some point worked for the Pacific Appeal. As I said, this was a sort of statewide newspaper that was meant to sort of represent African Americans throughout the state. And our 3 here have been major contributors. In fact, George Miller and John Richard also were at the conventions as well. So just some of the individuals that we found. As I've already mentioned, George Miller, John Richards, and Francis Miller, they were involved with the both all the conventions as well as the newspapers. But they were also, notably, all of their professions were barbers. So, and this is sort of a noted phenomenon throughout the country at this time, but barbers being sort of community leaders. And as I said, they were distributed for newspapers, and they were generally considered well-to-do citizens. So, for example, in local newspapers, they had advertisements for their businesses and the likes, and they were members of various associations. However, another person we found some info on is John Wright. He was a servant officially, we believe, at least that's what he was claimed of as, of Sampson Wright, and here in up in Santa Rosa here. And he later served as a cook in the Union Army. A few years after the Civil War in 1867, when Sampson Wright died, he willed some of his land and money to John, where he described him as, quote unquote, his black man, John Wright. So obviously, even though officially, they're trying to play with this language of, oh, he's just a servant, that sort of implies somebody who's willingly working here. But as Sampson Wright's sort of will implied, when he said his, that's not something you would the vocabulary use to somebody who is completely willing, completely free. No, this is somebody who has been forced into his household and has to work. However, unfortunately, the next bit of information that we found about John Wright is that he would later die in the poorhouse. So that is that he didn't have any property before he had to receive sort of public assistance to keep moving, which of course also means that he did not have received, or if he did receive it, he had lost the land that was promised to him. However, we've been unable to ascertain it. I thought I found maybe a few leads, but those have so far dried up. So unfortunately, we have a gap in the knowledge there. Finally, there was Ellen Toombs. So we know that she was purchased as a slave by Colonel William Toombs in Missouri in 1848, and then was brought here to California just a couple years later. And that they eventually settled in Mendocino. We know that she had 4 children: Taylor, Edmund, Sarah, and Amanda. And Taylor and Edmund are marked as mulattoes in the U.S. Census. So of course that means we know that she was having kids with some sort of white person, most likely Colonel Williams himself. So, obviously this is the case of, somebody who owns somebody, raping somebody who they have, ownership over. We do know later in 1858 that she made an escape attempt, but after sort of widespread threats of violence from the community against her and people who were harboring her, we do know that she had returned. However, beyond that, we're not quite exactly sure any other information. We do know that William Toombs died in 1875, but as for Ellen herself, we do not know anything else that is known about with her.
Question,
Yes.
do you know where Samuel Wright's land
in Santa Rosa?
Yeah, so they had a large amount of land, so I found a little dispute, sort of, I can't remember the exact area, but it is over in Santa Rosa. But however, this was a dispute between children, a few years later, so we've not been able to identify exactly what land, but we do know it's somewhere at least in the sort of the legal township at the time, but we've not been able to find it yet.
Continuing on in our interrogation of coerced labor within Sonoma County, we do come across the account of the Native American being more or less stolen from their indigenous homeland and then being appropriated for labor, unfree labor for the industrious, moral, and exceptionally born Anglo American. We do have a quote from the Act for the Government and Protection of the Indians is instituted in 1850. The top left hand of the corner that essentially any Native American that was found sort of floating or what's the word? Yes,
Idling.
loitering or idling or pursuing vagrancy in any sort of township would then be thrown into custody by whatever law enforcement, and then they would be rented out or just given to industrious white Americans for the purpose of teaching them a morally industrious profession that they would be able to take on potentially farther down the line. These times varied and the professions varied, of course, but it could be as little as 1 year to 20 years, depending on the age. Typically, we see within Native American miners the amount of apprenticeship going far, far beyond, not far beyond, but typically up to 18 years of age of when the Constitution or what the United States of America accepts as an adult, but it can continue beyond that. We found this within the Indian Indentured Petition records within the Sonoma County State Archives. As I've spoken, these people would just be found sometimes surreptitiously, coincidentally, or mysteriously on the borders of white man's property. Oftentimes, within the account of the petitioners who came to the courts to request that said Native American be taken into their custody, they would claim that the Native American wanted, more so begged, to be put into the service as they had no other forms of livelihood. They were a vagrant, no settled habitation, no family, or other means to provide for themselves. Furthermore, some of the professions we found that kind of overlap with the African American or the enslaved or unfree African American, in the sense that popular professions were husbandry, porting, cooking, buckaroo, which is kind of like an animal handler, cooking and barbers were also common, as we discussed, but not nearly as much for the Native American as those listed here. But something we did find quite interesting in our research is the case of Francisco and their child Mary. This is a story perhaps of Native American resistance, but it depends on how you spin it on the night, right? So we have Francisca, who is the child of Mary and Francisco, who is about age 4. Mary and her daughter came to Marcus J. Rosenborough on August 22nd, 1860. Conceivably, within the court record, they were there for much longer than that official date, but the day that they came to court was on August 22nd, 1860. Essentially, from what we can infer from the evidence is that Francisco kidnapped Francisca and took her to his master, Winston Guthrie. And so Mary petitioned her master, Marcus, to then use the courts to take her child back from Francisco. And since the court found that since Mary and Francisca were upon the property line of Marcus, they legally, or Marcus had legal ownership of Mary and Francisco. And so Francisco's master, Winston, couldn't keep her any longer. And I know that's kind of murky, and it's still sad that you have to give yourself into subservience and coercive labor to even keep your family together. But still, this is one of the few times an indigenous person or an unfree person could sort of turn the system against the industrious and white man of exceptional moral character to her own benefit. This chart's gonna be the death of me. I don't know if you can see, it was even worse during another presentation. But on this chart, it is a list of our Native Americans and then Christianized Native Americans, as their names aren't what they used to be. I believe we have a Napoleon on here somewhere. But if you look in, I believe it is the third column from the left, or going right. A lot of the times it'll say desirous of the Native American being placed under the protection of the petitioner. And then if you move over 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 more, so 7 to the left, you'll find that the most common reason of the rationale to indenture these Native Americans was vagrancy, was them not having any sort of livelihood because it was deprived from them because of the United States of America. And so, if we continue over all the way to not too far, 2 more columns to the right, we do see the length of the petition extending from 1 year to 20 years, as we see older with how old they are, the longer or the short. I'm terribly sorry. The longer the petition is for, the younger the petitionee is. And we do have a lot of townships, and none of them, from what we understand Sonoma County to be, were excluded, even going as insofar as the Russian River. And so what we have, at least in my and Cole's time, which includes from basically this entire academic year, 2024 to 2025 year, we do have some claims that we can substantiate, such as domesticated Indians was the largest category of workers in the white households in 1852. There are 319 Native Americans and 39 Black individuals who were classified as laborers, bound, or slaves within California in 1852 to 1860. In 1852, up to 10% of Sonoma County residents were unfree. Not that there was a total of 10% of Sonoma County residents that were unfree, but a potentiality of up to 10%. This just as so far as what our evidence tells us. Furthermore, as my friend Cole was just proclaiming, Shamla Shattuck and his Louisiana owner agreed that Sam would earn his freedom by working meritoriously for 2 years in California, which I believe would be the exception and not the rule. And we have been also meticulously trying to define what meritorious or exceptional service would mean in this period. And then just a glance to the future, we do have 2 wonderful SSURI onboards coming in. I believe one is Ella, the other is Samara, who will be joining Dr. K this summer and continuing our research. We do plan to pursue the Marcy House and see what other records that are important to our research that we can find. We also plan to peek our way into the Cotati archives, as most of our research has been relegated to the Santa Rosa archives insofar. Not that the people at Santa Rosa are terrible, they're excellent, but we're trying to find a new bone to pick up and continue our story and elaborating this untold history.
I have a quick question. So since 10% of Sonoma County residents were unfree,
Mhm.
is that of the whole, everyone in the county, including whites?
Yes.
Yeah, right. So taking the total Sonoma County population and then doing some math on the number of people that we think are likely to have been unfree. The problem is, like Mikey was saying, there's just a limit to the evidence in terms of like, are we sure? Sure. No, we think likely 10%. And so, yeah, that's a
What was the total population of San Diego at the time?
I don't have like my notes on it. With that level of specificity, like, yeah, I mean, it's somewhere back here. I can eventually find where I did that equation,
The
but
scope of that is massive, right?
yeah,
But like 10% of the population.
right,
Just like,
yeah.
Yeah, if you have any like further questions like that, we can always leave our emails with you and we can get back to you,
thank you.
of course. And then we're just going to organize and analyze and interpret the material we already have. It's quite vast, and we've heard that we hope to make more collaborative claims in the futures. And then for the possibility of immediate remediation or acknowledgement within our own community, we hope to examine what resources that the county has to offer, albeit under the current administration. We do want to see if there is a fund or perhaps an allocation of some kind that allow us to maybe fund a museum exhibit or some type of public history monument. But we will just have to see how that goes. That may be pushed farther out.
Were some of the, Black people moved here with the gold miners, even though it's.
Yeah, in fact, that's a major argument for why California became officially a free state. Because I don't know how, I can go very deep into the history of the Civil War, but the Republican Party was committed to stopping the further spread of slavery. The Republican Party, Abraham Lincoln, had no intention of ending slavery where it already existed. The fight of the Civil War was over the future of the West, right? It's about westward expansion. So the Republicans, anti-slavery Republicans and pro-slavery Democrats agreed we were going to genocide the people living here and extend to the shining sea and get that manifest destiny. What they disagreed upon is who is going to be doing that. The Republican Party is committed to the notion of free labor, which is the opposite of slave labor. Free labor, you get paid for your labor. You make a decision, you say, yes, I work for you for this amount of money, okay? And you can walk away, you're free. And that's fundamental to the Republican idea of how do you get ahead in the United States and of what does your citizenship consist? For a man, it consists of this ability to enter into contracts like that. Okay, and so you have the gold rush, right? And then you have, Euro Americans flooding in, but some of them have enslaved people. And so the free white Americans are looking over there at this guy who's controlling the labor of 4 men, and they're panning. It's not fair, right? It's not fair. So this is the argument. This is how the Republican Party is anti-slavery without being anti-racist in any way whatsoever, without being abolitionist on moral grounds and human beings like that, right? Instead, they're anti-slavery because they don't want free white Americans to compete against slave owning Americans who control that labor. Okay, so it's actually, it's such an excellent question because it really is the gold fields that make the argument for California to be a free state.
I wanted to share a note in the Delilah Beasley book that I'm often referencing, the Negro Trailblazers of California. So in that book, there was a note that was made about the life of a human being on a plantation in a southern slave state. And it's hard to even talk about it in the terms that they talk about it. It's just so brutal. So 4 years in the mines would give you more profit than an entire lifetime on an agricultural plantation. And so obviously the rush to take advantage of that is huge, right? And then sets up this conflict that you just described. It had huge incentives to bring people out here.
It also just trips me out the way that we also see kind of continued racialization in specific industries, right? So that there isn't that kind of like competition, right? So it's like, I think about farm workers now, right? And like the H-2A program and the way that we have guest workers coming in, right? Nobody's fighting about that,
Right.
because that's not work that white people do. It's not work that anybody else does unless you're Mexican, right? Like Mexican, like Latino. So it's just super interesting to see the ways in which capitalism has racialized specific industries to just cut off competition.
But yeah, we are open to questions.
Yeah, I'll like that was conveniently actually again.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, let's open it up for questions. Did you want me to? Can you start recording? Yeah, I'm gonna start recording.
I was surprised to hear that in the